So we've done the presenter checklist. We've looked at the things that you can do as a presenter to make sure your program works. What about if you're producing it or editing it? You may not be the presenter, or you might be. In this episode, we look at the podcast producer's checklist. It's episode 12 of Radio Skills for Podcasters.
Learn the secrets of the radio industry.
Create powerful podcasts.
Powerful podcasts.
Hello, I'm Kevin Field, your host of Radio Skills for Podcasters. In each episode, I share a plethora of skills, tips, tricks, and mistakes gained from a career of working in the radio industry. There are other episodes in this podcast series. You can learn about format, find out about show notes, look at presentation skills, and interview skills. This episode is about the podcast producer's checklist. We'll get into that in a few moments. First, though, feedback. Would love to hear from you. skills@radioskillsforpodcasters.com is my email, at radio_skills on Twitter. Feedback, coaching advice, anything like that, please feel free.
This is Radio Skills for Podcasters.
So what is a podcast producer's checklist? This is something that every producer has, a checklist, a tick off of things that you should be doing as a producer of your podcast. Now, you could be someone who just presents the podcast and you're not interested in that, and that's fine. I'm happy. Bye. No, don't go away. Come back. What are you doing? You could be the producer, the editor, the person who needs to make it all work after someone's blabbed away on the microphone just like me here. Well, this podcast is for you, whether you're a presenter or a producer. The checklist is designed just to help you out, to keep you on track, and maybe to share some moments with you where you go, I hadn't thought of that. I'll do that. Let me know if that happens, by the way. So let's look at sound, first of all. Does it sound right and real? Now, what I mean by that is, have you done some signal processing with it? Is it too quiet, or have you made it too loud? What impurities have you added within the audio? You can overprocess things. You can put too much of a high pass or a low pass or all that sort of stuff. Play, learn what the sound is going to be like. And also, if you're editing for someone else, ask them if they've got their audio setup preferences. They may already have. They may use Adobe Audition, and they may be able to send you their preferences of their setup of their effects array. Same for other signal processors, editors as well. But it's always, in my view, right to make it sound real. Are your edits natural? By that I mean, are you removing every breath? Are crutch words being taken out everywhere? Does it sound like it's very tightly edited? In my view, you don't need to remove every breath. There is a technique you can use in Adobe Audition and others. You just, when you're going through your edit, you make the breaths quieter before you add any processing in. So if you're going to compress your audio, it will bring the breaths up so they sound very breathy. I've spoken about that before. So check the breaths out, but don't take them all out because it's real, it's natural. And crutch words, an occasional crutch word is fine. Leave them in, they're real. People use them in real life when they're talking. Are your music levels right in comparison to speech levels? Sometimes on podcasts you hear the music at the start and then suddenly it disappears and the presenter's talking. Or you may hear on a podcast the music's there, the presenter starts talking but you can't quite hear them. You're like, I can't hear them, what they're saying. And then the music disappears and then they're louder. Or even the music's very quiet and the presenter's very loud. You need to try and match up the levels. You can dip the music a bit as soon as the podcast has started and when someone starts talking. But try and fade that music into the background of the speech, in my view. Don't just cut it suddenly. It just doesn't sound quite right. Does the show flow properly? Or will the listener get confused or lost? This is a key thing. This is when we were talking about format. You don't have to have a really strict format in podcasting. You can move things around. It's good, as I've said before, to have things sounding similar in the same place each time. In other words, the same but different every week. That's really good practice in my view, because you get a really good sound to it. But if your style is very loose every week, it's very loose every week. Fine, fair enough. But be careful that the listener doesn't get confused or lost when they're listening to the program and that they don't fade out. These 2 episodes of Radio Skills for Podcasters are slightly different to the others. And I've said that at the start, that this episode is slightly different. We're going to do a list. So don't let your listeners get confused or lost. Is there background noise? Now, this should have been checked when recording at the start, but sometimes it remains and it could obstruct the listen. So have a think about that when you're editing the podcast. Is there something you get, the listener's going to hear that? When I was doing the UK Podcast Awards last year, I was a judge and I was listening back to audio. One of them was a really good, I'm not going to name it, but it was a really good podcast. I was really enjoying the content, and he had this of an aeroplane in the background as they were doing the podcast. And it was kind of like, that's a shame, because it was recorded as if it was in a studio. You see, and it wasn't in studio, so they gave that idea. Look, the thing is, if you do have background noise, then be honest about it. I'm recording this in my bedroom, and that's fine. It's all right. Everyone knows you're in your bedroom. There's going to be background noise. Make a point of it, or not. Take that bit out. I mean, it's up to you what you do with your background noise. It's there, then make it obvious. There was an episode of a podcast I listened to, and I mentioned it in a previous episode of this one, where there was a dog barking. They did as much as they could to bring that in and actually make it personable, talk about the person, all that sort of stuff. That's fine in a way, but for me, it took me away from the point they were talking, and I found it really hard to tune back in. So it really does depend on what you want to achieve with your podcast and what you think your listener wants and what your listener actually wants. For me, I wanted that lovely information, and then there was a dog barking. But check background noise. Always make sure there's not something that obstructs the listener's listen. We used to do this test at Capital Radio Group, and this was breakfast boot camp. So we'd go up to head office, or along to head office, and all the breakfast producers from the flagship stations would go to head office at Capital Radio in London, Leicester Square, and we'd get in a room and we'd do a boot camp session where we'd listen back to our own audio and critique each other, which was a bit scary. But also then we'd do this thing called the boring test. And we have to do it to our own audio and our competitors' audio. And what we did is we played that audio back, and we had to be honest about this. When we got bored, we had to put our hand up. Simple test. Get bored, put your hand up. And it was an idea of keeping things simple and talking about how to make breakfast radio compelling. You could do the same thing with your podcast, especially if you're producing it. Is it too long? Is there too much to it? Sometimes less is more. Unless the content is really compelling, cut it shorter, edit it shorter. Trust me, your listeners will love that you've done that. You don't have to have a 2-hour podcast, 1 hour, 45 minutes, or 45-minute podcast if it doesn't need to be that long. If it does, and it's all great content and your listeners are loving it, fine, fair enough. But try the boring test. Get someone to listen to it, a friend, a colleague, whatever. Tell them to be honest. Get a stranger to listen to it. They have to be honest with you and say, put your hand up when you get bored. Ideally, they're a target listener, though. Don't just give it to someone who just would never listen to your podcast about your hobby. Ahead of the mix down, listen in headphones as well as speakers to check for untoward sounds or something that's happening, something you might have missed. That's a really important tip, I think, because some people listen to headphones, some people listen to speakers in their car. Most people listen to podcasts while traveling or doing something else. Some listen in the kitchen, all that sort of stuff. You need to have ears in different places where people might listen. Never, ever put raw content online to a platform where people could potentially hear it. It's a really important piece of advice because mistakes happen. All right. You might put something up and you might think you've just put it in your save area within a content management system, and then suddenly it's actually on there and people are listening to it. Be really careful with that. Just don't do it. Don't just put it somewhere as a Dropbox cloud storage place or something like that if you want to, or put it on some kind of flash disk drive or something, but don't put it online where there's a listenable platform. Always keep your raw and keep it safe. The other thing I'd say also is keep a raw copy of the audio before you start editing. It's really important. Back this up. Make a copy of that raw audio. Right, you can get rid of it in the end. You can put it in cloud storage. You can put it on a flash drive, whatever. You can move that somewhere that's safe. Always keep that. It's the advice I give everyone I'm teaching about editing audio. So many people have lost great audio. Some great stories of people losing audio, or dreadful stories. And before you put it up online, before you upload it, listen to the whole thing again, because sometimes it doesn't mix down the whole thing. Sometimes Adobe Audition or GarageBand or whatever, Audacity, whatever platform you're using, sometimes it doesn't mix the complete thing down. So you need to listen to the whole thing. It might say it's 15 minutes long and it turns out it's only 1 minute 30 or something. Listen back to the whole thing. You can then understand if the mix works right, if it felt good as a podcast. Did your presenter checklist that you had before, did you tick every one of those when you're doing it? Does it work for you? God, it's a lot of work, isn't it? It seems like a lot of work, but once you get it into a workflow, this isn't a lot of work. It really isn't. It's something that becomes natural to you and you do it. And we all still make mistakes. I have. We still do. We're human, and this advice hopefully will help you create great podcasts. That's what this podcast is about, helping you make great podcasts.
Learn the secrets of the radio industry.
Radio Skills for Podcasters.
If you'd like to get your hands on the podcast producers checklist, all you have to do is go to the show notes of this very podcast at radioskillsforpodcasters.com and you can download it for free. Hopefully all of that was helpful to you. Right, next time on Radio Skills for Podcasters, we start talking about award schemes. These are the big award schemes. These are when you're entering your audio and you have to do a written piece at the same time. How do you do it? How are you successful with it? What audio to put in? And how do you do a write-up that supports your audio? That's all to come in episode 13 of Radio Skills for Podcasters. Perhaps not unlucky for you if you're entering an award. Catch you then.
Find us on Facebook, Google+, Radio Skills for Podcasters.
At radio_skills on Twitter.
Thanks for listening.
www.radioskillsforpodcasters.com.